morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you planned today. The Trump cabinet and administration picks are coming in fast and furious, so we're going to have a lot to discuss in the show today.
Good to be with you, Robby, and good to have so much to discuss on this rather chilly day in the nation's capital. Winter is coming.
Finally upon us. Finally upon us.
But let's get started. Robby, what is on your radar?
All right. Well, Trump is staffing up that second administration, and I have some good news, but also some less good news. First, we will start with the good news. Trump has announced that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be running a Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short. I don't know if you got that, D-O-G-E. Elon loves that little meme, that little dog. In a statement, Trump said this will become potentially the Manhattan Project of our time. I look forward to Elon and Vivek making changes to the federal bureaucracy with an eye on efficiency and at the same time making life better for all Americans. Now, Trump is right, of course, that the federal government is bloated and wasteful. The question is whether yet another government program will actually improve matters. My idea, is to eliminate various departments, not add new ones. Department of Government Efficiency is almost an oxymoron, as Ron Paul once said. But if Elon and Vivek are serious about getting rid of unnecessary federal programs and regulations, well, good for them. By adding Elon and Vivek to his administration, Trump has chosen two people who are committed to the America First agenda in terms of domestic policy. These are solid choices. Now for the less good news. Trump's rumored choice for Secretary of State has baffled many of his allies and supporters who hoped that this time, finally, they would be getting an America First foreign policy in which the U.S. did not needlessly involve itself in world affairs, and in particular, military entanglements. Unfortunately, Trump's choice appears to be Florida Senator Marco Rubio, an ardent neoconservative who has supported every single disastrous foreign intervention undertaken by the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and even the Biden administration. Trump initially seemed to understand that the people backing him this time do not want a return to the Republican Party of old. That's why he smartly announced that Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo, two Bush-style neoconservatives, would not play a role in the administration. This delighted Trump's non-interventionist, national conservative, and libertarian fans. Marco Rubio, however, represents a return to form, and an insincere one at that. The truth is that Marco Rubio, while being committed to a hawkish interventionist foreign policy, has experimented with just about every form of conservatism there is. He was vehemently against Trump, calling him a con artist and the, quote, most vulgar person to ever aspire to the presidency, but now he's for Trump. Okay, well, he's in good company there. Basically, every Republican has made that pivot. He's also completely changed his position on immigration. He formerly supported a pathway to citizenship. Now he doesn't. In 2016, Rubio knew that tariffs were bad policy and that they would hurt us just as much as they would hurt China. Today, of course, he wants to expand tariffs. So what does Marco Rubio really believe in? I'm not sure anyone knows for sure. But the only category of policy views he holds and has never flipped on is foreign policy, where he is reflexively hawkish. As former Representative Ron Paul, a non-interventionist libertarian, put it on X, yesterday was a bad day for those who endorse America First in our foreign policy, with reported Trump appointments of neocons like Elise Stefanik, Mike Waltz, and Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. Many who hoped that Trump 2.0 would be different than Trump 1.0 are feeling dejected and betrayed. Is there any hope left? Now, I give Ron Paul a tremendous amount of credit for continuously calling out the neoconservatives. His son, Senator Rand Paul, also had Rubio's number all the way back in 2015 when he pointed out that Marco Rubio and Hillary Clinton were indistinguishable on foreign policy. Let's watch Paul on CNN back then.
How do you view Hillary Clinton in terms of her foreign policy views?
I see her as a neoconservative. I see her I see her and Rubio as being the same person. They both want a no-fly zone. They both have supported activity in Libya, the war in Libya that toppled Gaddafi, an intervention that made us less safe. They both have supported pouring arms into the Syrian civil war, a mistake that I think allowed ISIS to grow stronger. And they both have supported the Iraq war. So, I mean, what's the difference?
So Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio are the same person. How do you define a neoconservative?
Somebody a lot of times who believes in big government, both domestically and internationally. And so many of the big neoconservatives came out of a movement. They were Democrats mostly. They were some Marxists and socialists, but they were people who ultimately came to believe that we needed a big government involved internationally as well. So a neoconservative often is a big government person for domestic policy and a big government person for internationalism. And I think actually Hillary Clinton fits the bill probably better than any, but I think she's also the most likely of all the candidates to get us back involved in another war in the Middle East.
Should Donald Trump pick for his Secretary of State a Republican who is functionally the equivalent of Hillary Clinton? Of course not. Voters could not have been more clear that they want the opposite of that. They want a break from more than 2 decades of pointless, costly intervention in the Middle East. They want to de-escalate tensions with Russia and with China. They want the federal government to avoid starting new wars or involving itself in regime change. In fact, the power to declare war properly belongs with Congress rather than the president. Does Marco Rubio understand that? So I have a different candidate in mind. Now, if you watched my interview with Libertarian Party Chair Angela McArdle yesterday on Rising, you'll recall she says that in exchange for Libertarian support, Trump promised to appoint a Libertarian to his administration. Well, there's perhaps no more important role than Secretary of State. It was formerly a stepping stone to the presidency, and the Secretary is the highest-ranking cabinet official in the presidential line of success. So Trump could make good on his promise and reassure voters of his commitment to enact America First by choosing Senator Rand Paul for the position. Just my friendly suggestion. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the other cabinet appointments later on the show in a minute. So let's just stick with the Rubio, Elon, Vivek. I like Elon, Vivek. Again, I don't know that this is the perfect role for them because a department to get rid of unnecessary government departments. So maybe it has to start with itself.
I thought that would warm your libertarian heart.
It does warm it. It warms it on principle.
But it's not really, I mean, I think the question is how they work in practice, because one of my issues with this, and of course we'll get to Marco Rubio in a second, who I've plenty to say about as well, but the thing that I have an issue with, particularly in Musk's case, is he creates this image which is the kind of renegade image, and he's, for the people and all of that. SpaceX, which of course is the space exploration company that he owns, signed in 2021 a $1.8 billion classified contract with essentially the military, a particular wing of the military. So you're giving somebody who has massive business interests with the federal government a role that, even if it's not frankly a real department, is still about dealing with the federal government. And it just seems that whether he, says wild things on X or not, you're giving this guy enormous say over things in which he has a vested financial interest.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we should all be paying a lot of attention to what he's doing vis-a-vis advising the government. We should all be keeping an eye on government contracting to make sure there's not going to be any more subsidies for things that help Elon's businesses. I totally agree with that point. I share that concern. And
with Vivek, I have never been quite persuaded what Vivek Ramaswamy's expertise is supposed to be.
Opposing DEI.
Well,
that's his expertise.
That may be his expertise. His expertise may be getting himself on television a lot and making statements that appeal to the Trump base or whomever he's trying to appeal to at that moment. People often cite the fact that he's a very rich man. That is true, but one of the capstones or origins of his wealth was a slightly questionable story where basically in the area of biotech, he formed a subsidiary, he bought this drug that had already failed numerous times in treatment of Alzheimer's, he hyped it up, there was an IPO for the company, he cashed out and the drug failed and a lot of people were left holding the bag. So I'm not honestly especially impressed by either of those guys. I think Elon Musk has a better business record, but they seem questionable choices to me.
I hope they exercise, there's a ideological battle taking place right now behind the scenes for what the direction of the Trump administration will be. There is the neoconservatives, the national conservatives, the libertarians, the social conservatives, and all of those kind of interest groups are trying to, because Trump is not ideological at all.
Right,
he doesn't care. He sees someone on TV and goes, oh, they fight, they do a good job, you're hired, here's a cabinet position. It's the more ideological figure. So I'm more on the Vivek, Elon's side in what the kinds of policies I want to come out of the Trump administration. This is why I was so discouraged by the Rubio announcement, because whatever he is, it is not what I am, as far as I can tell.
No, and I think that's true. And I think that one of the things that is a bad trait of Rubio's, but maybe you would take some comfort in, is the fact that he is so changeable ideologically. The only thing that has been consistent about Marco Rubio is that he's disappointed pretty much everybody at some time, right? He came up as this Tea Party guy.
Yeah, I liked that. That version was okay. That version was passable, and he threw that out the door.
As soon as he got elected. And then there was the reasonable centrist immigration reform guy. And then there was the anti-Trump 2016 person, and now there's the pro-Trump person. So maybe in a Trump administration, he is ideologically fungible enough to be more to your liking.
Yeah, we will find out, I suppose. There's still time, though, to have a pick more to my liking. Well, that was not the only cabinet announcements yesterday. We have Kristi Noem, we have Pete Hegseth, lots more to talk about on the show. Please keep watching. Thanks very much. Well, Trump 2.0 is coming into focus. One might say he has deftly named his choices for top cabinet positions. They have one thing in common. They are all, in fact, Trump loyalists, which isn't surprising. They are joining his team. In the last week, Trump named Susie Wiles as White House Chief of Staff. Stephen Miller will be her number 2. And on Monday, New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik was named United Nations Ambassador. Former Texas Congressman and Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe will spearhead the CIA.
And then on Tuesday, the South Dakota governor who shot her dog, Kristi Noem, was tapped for Secretary of Homeland Security.
Trump also announced Fox News' Pete Hegseth to be the next Secretary of Defense. Hegseth is a veteran with battleground experience in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Progressive media, not surprisingly, mocked Trump's picks. Here's Joy Reid on her show, The Readout. Let's watch.
The former and future president is moving quickly to fill the clown car and round out his cabinet before he changes his mind and fires them all. Moments ago, Trump announced that he has selected Fox Weekend morning show host, you can't make this up, Pete Hegseth, to serve as Secretary of Defense, because why not?
Late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel also made fun of the picks. Here's a bit of his opening monologue. I bet it's so funny.
Trump, and we just got this news like a minute ago, hired Pete Hegseth. You know who this is? He's a guy on the Fox and Friends Weekend Edition to be Secretary of Defense. Hulk Hogan must be devastated.
So we're getting into some real meaty choices. Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. He is a veteran. We know all about what he thinks because he's been the morning show host of Fox for a long time.
Sure.
I think I've been on television with him a few times. He has made his foreign policy views very known. I would say that he is also someone who tends toward a hawkishness or a pro-military engagement. He was a big supporter of the Iraq War. I don't know if he's changed his views subsequently, but Trump likes a fighter and probably thought he does a good job on TV. Has been interviewed by him on Fox and Friends multiple times, and so that's kind of how his choices work, I think.
So let me do something unexpected by speaking up briefly on behalf of Pete Hegseth, and
Great.
then I'll say why he's wrong about everything. All the coverage, naturally enough, is focusing on his TV work, and it's Fox and Friends, and that is an obvious and easy source of disparagement. He does, apparently, have a master's in public policy from Harvard, which has been mentioned almost nowhere that I have seen, and suggests that there is a functioning thinker there behind whatever theatrics that we might show from Fox News, where he once threw an axe and hurt somebody from West Point, I believe.
You're saying he's more than a pretty face.
He's more than a pretty axe-throwing face. Now, where I have much more of a problem with him is not in terms of his background, but in terms of what he actually argues. And to make a long story short, one of his sort of cause celebs was campaigning to pardon or to otherwise improve the situation of 3 people who had been or were still members of the US military who had been accused of all kinds of abuses. The most notable being a man by the name of Edward Gallagher, who was a Navy SEAL and was charged with murdering a prisoner. He was subsequently acquitted in rather hazy circumstances a prosecution witness who had been granted immunity changed his testimony at the last moment. But in any event, there was an investigation done as part of that case that showed lots of people who had served under Mr. Gallagher accusing him of various abuses. And the fact that Hegseth lines up with someone like that is, I think, dangerous in terms of his overall worldview. And just if I could briefly, Robby, in that case, the Navy prosecutor in the case talking about Gallagher said that he had basically provided ISIS with propaganda manna from heaven because his own behavior was so brutal that it had fueled the case made by America's enemies. And so to have someone aligned with or an advocate for that person as probably the Secretary of Defense, I think, is troubling.
I don't know very much about, I vaguely remember the situation and his advocacy there, but I'm sure I agree with you that those kinds of actions or activities should not be defended and are things that our enemies use to galvanize terrorism against us. Something he is taking a lot of flack for, where I think it's a little bit unfair. I've seen some commentary about this morning about what he said about women serving in the military, where he said that they should not be in combat roles, and that's being described as some kind of anti-woman thing. But he said they could serve in the military, they just shouldn't serve in combat role because, and this is where the reality of biological difference does come in, the vast, overwhelming majority of women cannot satisfy the physical standards requirements for some of these positions. The standards I'm for, if you can, fine, but the Black Widow superhero-esque person that exists in Marvel Comics mostly does not exist in real life, and the standards should not be lowered to make some kind of sex-based distribution more fair or equitable.
Is that Hegseth's argument? Though I'm honestly not entirely sure.
I believe that is his argument.
And I wasn't sure whether his argument was that because of literal physical strength, that was the reason for it, or if he was implying that it introduced a kind of messiness in terms of heterosexual relationships among the troops.
Oh, no, I think he was saying it was because of physical. I could be wrong. That's my view, is just because we should not be reducing our standards in order to have more, gender parity.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about Kristi Noem for Department of Homeland Security. I would rather just abolish this department entirely. You and I probably disagree on which aspects of the federal government should be abolished, but maybe on this one, you're going to be a little bit with me because you as a more progressive inclined person probably share a lot of my criticism
of it for sure.
Domestic surveillance and civil liberties violations, the Patriot Act, the weaponization of the government against innocent Americans. It's all been a total disaster. What I like about Kristi Noem is that her COVID governance was a little bit more skeptical, even by Republican standards, of mandates and violating people's civil liberties. So I hope she brings that same spirit to the role. But again, the role should not exist. It should just be, the department should be closed down.
This is such an interesting one because the points in which we agree and disagree are very intermingled here. I would be glad if she brings that greater skepticism of government to the Department of Homeland Security. I was less thrilled when she did it for COVID, which I thought was reckless. I would favour more of a nanny state when it comes to COVID, Robby.
Well, that's all right. We like you anyway, Niall. All right.
Survive.
Lots more to talk about today on Rising. Ken Klippenstein will be with us to discuss the Marco Rubio dossier that nobody else in the media thought you should be allowed to see. Stay tuned. Sad and frustrated. Those are the words of one CNN staffer amid the bombshell report that the network is cutting hundreds of jobs and will axe top stars.
Executives are set to unleash a fury of layoffs following CNN's abysmal Election Day ratings. The network clocked in at just 5.1 million viewers, lagging behind competitors like MSNBC and Fox News. The presidential election has shined a spotlight on the decline of mainstream media, especially cable news.
The layoffs come after veteran journalist Chris Wallace announced his departure from the network, taking leadership there by surprise. Rumors have been swirling for weeks that senior stars like Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper have been denied raises. Oh, it's so sad.
I'm going to be more sympathetic because it is unknown which on-air talent will be given the boot. But the highest paid stars reportedly include Anderson Cooper. Maybe I'm less sympathetic about this, $20 million per year, allegedly. Erin Burnett, $6 million, and rising star Caitlin Collins at $3 million.
The man behind the layoffs, Chief Executive Mark Thompson, aims to carry out a digital news first vision. The media exec also cut 100 jobs back in July, which was roughly 3% of CNN's workforce. X users went wild. Conservative account Wall Street Silver posted, quote, "Maybe the new owners will figure out that lying nonstop to your audience is a lousy business model." And media group Sasquatch posted, quote, "This is what happens when you get caught gaslighting an entire nation." I wish we need to have tissues on set so I can,
Robby,
stop the crying and the tears.
These media are comrades in the media.
Oh, no industry solidarity. Industry, I'm a class traitor. I hate the people in our profession.
Looking at redundancies coming down the pike, I mean, which may hit people who are not on $20 million a year, and those are the ones I have sympathy for. Let me make a case of a kind for CNN here, which is that I don't really think the problem is the one that was outlined in those tweets. The problem is there is a cultural shift going on where people are not watching linear television so much anymore. They're coming to fantastic shows like Rising, but there is also a broader just cord cutting and all of that. And that has left the average age of cable news audiences really quite old. The median age of CNN viewers is 67. Now, we love our more mature viewers here as well, but the problem is, I think, a cultural shift rather than the flaws that one could point out in CNN's journalistic product.
Yeah, and look, Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper, you may disagree with them. I disagree with them plenty of the time. They're talented people. Are they $20 million talent? It's difficult to make money when you're paying someone $20 million is just the honest-to-God truth of it. Now, they're big stars and people watch for their names, so I get it. You're right that I think it would be a shame to have all the littler people who are doing a lot of hard work for those shows, the behind-the-scenes work, the reporting, and you cut those positions, you hollow out those positions, and then you keep your stars, but then you don't have as much real journalism going on. You don't have any meat for them to dig into. I actually have been a little bit more positively disposed towards CNN in recent weeks. I've been watching it more, and I've been seeing that I've said this before, I think they're almost taking a page out of our book a little bit, where they've been having more robust disagreements, discussions, debates at like roundtables between some people who are a little outside their normal staple of hosting, of commentary. So I think that's very good. I'm glad they're doing more of that, but whether it's in time to kind of save the business model because of the reasons you point out, that we're transitioning to online, to streaming, to social media. There's also just something going on where I think media brands have lost trust in a way that individuals have not. Mm-hmm. The rise of Substack, the rise of independent journalists / content creators. It's not attached to a brand like CNN. It used to be, oh, it's CNN. We're just going to watch CNN. Now it's individuals, and individuals often don't need a brand, a CNN, in order to thrive in this new ecosystem.
No, and I think there are obvious strengths to that if people can survive under their own steam without being accountable to a boss or a corporate line. I think in the specifics of CNN's case, it is interesting watching the transition that you were talking about, where they now do have more people of contrasting views, but not just people, screaming at each other. They actually have, on occasion, fairly substantive discussions. In a way, I think the CNN brand in particular got very confused because many years ago it had been this sort of liberal-leaning but kind of centrist news operation. Then I think it, particularly during Trump's first term, it became very trolly, like everything was the biggest outrage that had ever happened in the history of civilization. And that worked for a little while ratings-wise, but it's a kind of McDonald's approach, right? It's just like there's junk food that you get a quick fix from and then it goes. And now they're trying to position themselves in a difficult climate where the overall audience for cable news is going down and their brand is not that well defined, except by their critics who just see it as, fake news or whatever. Unfair, I think.
Very much so. Yeah. Well, MSNBC's viewership has plummeted since Election Day, by the way, with a 54% drop in primetime viewership. Evidently, the anti-Trump network did not receive a bump whatsoever from Donald Trump being back in the news. MSNBC averaged 1.1 million viewers in October, but took a nosedive to an average audience of 736,000 on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week, following President-elect Donald Trump's victory over Vice President Kamala Harris. This comes as Fox News viewership grew by 61% over the same period. Yeah, declining to, I mean, I know it's not quite equivalent, but I was looking at our numbers, and not to explain how the sausage made of people, but we had 1 million people watch in a 24-hour period watching our commentary last week, post-election commentary, which is pretty good. They can't even get that many people to watch contemporaneously, have the TV on, and we gotta win you up. We gotta lure you back in with each new video, because it could recommend you something else. You could click away. Just got the TV on, you can leave it on, and that counts as a view. So in some ways, our job is more difficult, and we're doing pretty well for ourselves.
I like this tooting off our own horn. I think there should be more of that. You know what the debate now about cable news versus shows like ours reminds me of? When I first came to the US, which was in 2003. People who were older than me used to talk about the networks versus cable, so it was like ABC, CBS, NBC, and then like the cable networks, as if the cable networks were this exotic thing. And like for me, just arriving in the country, there was never any difference. It was just stuff that you saw on TV. Now I think for people, there's video content that most people are accessing either through their phone or computer, and it's not really like, oh well, this is the big broadcast name, and this is a separate YouTube thing. People are, thankfully for us, open to all sorts of ways of acquiring and getting their news.
And it is true that I end up consuming a lot of like CNN and MSNBC and The View. We talk about them a lot here because I see clips of them on Twitter, on X. So if they stop making that, it would be the case, like somebody has to make the content in the first place so that we can react to that, and then they react to us, and then someone else reacts to that. But the thing has to exist itself. So I hope the business model doesn't get so bad that there's never an underlying thing being created anymore.
No, absolutely not. And to that point, like a lot of the most stringent critics of the mainstream media spend their entire time talking about things that the mainstream media has been the first to report and then picking holes in that reporting. So if the whole business model collapses and you don't have a New York Times or Associated Press or whatever, those people are actually going to be struggling.
Well, right, because when people complain about CNN or whoever they're complaining about, usually they're complaining about the often trollish opinion commentary they're getting from the pundits rather than the underlying news reporting, which is often quite good at any of these mainstream places. It's also good at Fox News and other, the reporting they do is very award-winning and good in the Wall Street Journal and all these places. Now, sometimes reporting is not good at, we've talked a lot about Russiagate, and I think some of the panics around misinformation have been, even in terms, not just the commentary, but the news stuff, or just being too credulous or too believing of government sources and, experts say, national intelligence experts say, without really probing that. That's been a problem forever. That's part of what led to the Iraq War in the first place, just being too much credibility assigned to anonymous analyst-type people, and the New York Times fell for that, and everybody else. So mainstream media sometimes does deserve the criticism.
Yeah, when it's too overly close to those in power, I think it does. And when it's more scrutinizing and more rigorous, then it's good.
Yes. All right, we'll be back with a lot more on Rising today, lots more to get into. Speaker Johnson might have another fight on his hands. We're going to see if Republicans are coming for him for not enacting Trump's agenda. Find out next. Trump will meet with President Biden at the White House on Wednesday. It's unclear what the pair will discuss, but Congress will almost certainly be a topic. This is as the future of Speaker Mike Johnson is on the chopping block. According to reporting from the Hill, hardline conservatives are plotting to challenge the Louisiana congressman for the gavel. The House is set to consider Johnson in internal elections on Wednesday.
Now, Johnson faced a challenge of a kind in May when Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congressman Thomas Massie sought to oust him. But he retained the gavel on that occasion after Democrats and Republicans joined forces to thwart the Greene-Massie effort. The Speaker, who has clung close to Trump, is optimistic he'll win the speakership once again. He spoke to reporters on Tuesday, telling them he has got Trump's support. Let's watch.
I think you're going to have a very different mood in the Republican conference going forward, because we do have unified government. We have an extraordinary opportunity ahead of us. Nobody wants to squander that.
Being Speaker of the House with Republicans in charge seems like a pretty difficult job.
Worst job in Washington, I would say.
Yeah, they are continuously frustrated, although I would say Mike Johnson earned their frustration in many ways, the frustration of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, who said, why did we bother replacing Kevin McCarthy if we just got someone who has all the same policy priorities? They were particularly upset that there was prioritization of Ukraine funding and some other things that he seems to march in lockstep with Democrats and with Biden on that. I don't know that challenge to him will be successful because Trump seems to have his back in a way that Trump didn't quite have Kevin McCarthy's back, but we will find out.
We will. I mean, obviously it is a very, very fractious Republican conference, and some of that is because there are people who are sort of troublemakers and political bomb throwers, but there are also very legitimate political differences. So you have Republicans, I assume they will be back, most of them in this Congress, who previously were representing districts that President Biden had won in 2020. They need to be concerned about moderate challengers or centrist Democrats. Then you have the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world and the Thomas Massies of the world. And you also have people, well, actually Massie is in this category, I think, people who have legitimate objections to what they see as excessive government spending. Now, obviously, Liberals, progressives don't see it that way at all. But people like Chip Roy, for example, the congressman from Texas, is someone who, as best I can make out, is very sincere about believing that the government is often wasteful in its spending or the president tries to usurp congressional authority. And in an odd way, someone like that is more difficult for a speaker to contend with because it's not just theatrics. He can't really be mollified in quite the same way as some of the other people who I think do these things, frankly, for publicity and Twitter clout and all the rest.
Well, and someone like Massie wants to reduce government spending on all fronts. I mean, this is the problem with Republicans is they say they want lower government, but then when they actually get in charge, what you get is more government spending, particularly on the military and other things, and then you don't actually get cuts to social services, healthcare, Medicare, that kind of thing, the entitlements, which really do bankrupt us.
But serve an important social good,
serve a social good of sorts. But Massie does, and Rand Paul does, and the small number, very small, too small, I would argue, number of actually libertarian-leaning Republicans do want also to cut down on the military spending. Massie has been very vocal about not wanting to give unlimited aid to Israel. That actually earned him an AIPAC negative sort of ad. Didn't matter. He won his district defiantly. I think, again, it goes to show that even many Republican primary voters feel similarly about how much involvement, military assistance, et cetera, we should be doing in the rest of the world. So, that goes to show you. But it'll be interesting to see if we get a new speaker and how they handle all this. I'm also, of course, interested to know what Biden and Trump might end up talking about. I think Trump is usually he's defeated the Democrats. Right. There's no need to pile on. I'm sure it will be a courteous, gracious. Once he's won, he doesn't continue the
rubbing the salt.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think I'm sure it will be a nice meeting, and probably that will be it.
Yeah, I suspect it will be. I mean, this happened in 2016 when, of course, Barack Obama was the outgoing president. Trump won that shock victory over Hillary Clinton. As best as I can remember, that was a civil, if body language-wise, tense meeting. And I
believe Trump said it was civil. I said he had a nice meeting with Obama. And
he was quite nice about Obama, and Obama was, civil toward him.
Trump is very gracious in victory, not so much in defeat, but very gracious in victory.
And to the point about not being gracious in defeat, he did not invite Biden in 2020.
No.
He didn't accept the outcome of the election, and we know where that got us, and now he's back in again. But look, I mean, Biden also, we have been very critical of him from different perspectives on this show, but he is sort of an institutionalist and a traditionalist in many ways. So I think the fact that this is the sort of customary thing for the outgoing president to do to his successor, I do not imagine Biden will take even the slightest jab at Trump, and I suspect that will be reciprocated.
Do we know if Biden plans to attend the inauguration?
I don't believe it has been explicitly stated, but I think it is assumed that he will do. Now, I'm assuming a sitting or an outgoing vice president also does, which means that Kamala Harris would be there. Hillary Clinton famously did go in, well, I guess it was early 2017 for the inauguration.
Yes.
And seemed quite ashen-faced and disgusted, as you might expect. But she did actually show up, so it'll be interesting to watch.
I saw Kamala Harris, there was a photo on social media of her playing with the little kids.
That's right.
Her nieces or something.
I think
yeah.
so. Her nieces or grand.
And this was I think this was a Libs of TikTok thing, which I just totally disagree with. She clearly had like a glass of white wine, Chardonnay or something, and then people were like, Libs of TikTok was like, oh, surprise! What is wrong with that? It's fine. Let the lady have some wine. Jesus Christ, it's fine.
I mean, also, if you've lost a presidential election, which is a kind of life and career-defining moment, I think you're allowed to unwind in some fashion without massive mockery or derision. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I think Kamala's future is probably not going to be in politics anymore. I don't think she'll want it. I think, she's probably going to do speaking kind of thing, book writing kind of thing, right? Do you envision any other role for her?
Thought leadership and all that stuff. Yeah, and lots of well-paid conferences. I don't really see a political way back. Now, some people disagree with me on this and think that she can make the argument that she only had 100 days or whatever it was. She was facing headwinds because of Biden and inflation. Maybe it wasn't her fault. But I get back to the thing that, I don't necessarily see Kamala Harris as a particularly formidable politician. She certainly wasn't in the 2020 primary. I think she had good moments in this campaign, but those kind of fell away into things like, there's not a thing I would have done differently and other awkward moments. I think, honestly, she'd be better taking the L and going on with the rest of her life.
Yeah, it was just not that close at the end of the day. If it would have been a little bit closer, maybe she could have made that argument. And she still can make that argument, and she was in a difficult position, but yeah, I don't see much for her. Another question is Joe Biden's political career actually over, because I will just point this out, he is eligible to run again for president one day.
The non-consecutive Biden term.
We could have a non-consecutive Biden term following a non-consecutive Trump term.
Second term beginning when so he's 81 now and he's about to turn 82. So a second term beginning when he's 86.
Stranger things have happened.
Biden 2028.
You heard it here first. Well, there's a lot more to talk about today on Rising, including that interview with Ken Klippenstein coming up next. Please stay tuned. Some are elated, some are disappointed, but most are surprised. Senator Marco Rubio is apparently going to be President-elect Donald Trump's choice for the Secretary of State position. Rubio was at one point a contender as well for the vice presidency, but a 551-page vice presidential vetting document showed that he might not have been up for a role in the Trump administration after all, given past criticisms of Trump, although that is also true for virtually anyone else Trump could have considered as well. Independent journalist Ken Klippenstein just published the facts of this dossier, and he is here with us now to discuss. Nice to see you, Ken. So tell us what is in the Marco Rubio portion of the dossier. We previously discussed with you the J.D. Vance dossier, which you received. It was hacked by some foreign power, which caused virtually, literally everyone else in the mainstream media who received it to say, no, we're not going to let readers engage with this. And you made a different decision. Why don't you remind our viewers of what your thinking was, and then tell us what insights you've gleaned from what the Trump campaign had to say about Rubio.
Yeah, so the FBI said that this was hacked by Iranian-linked cyber actors for the purpose of influencing U.S. opinion in relation to the election. They obviously favored Biden winning over Trump, Trump having a more hardline policy on Iran. Now that the election's done, I don't know how effective that's going to be, but I decided to publish it yesterday after it was reported that Rubio was being considered for a Secretary of State position in the Trump administration. And the document gives you a sense of, first of all, why he wasn't picked for vice president, but also the complexion of Rubio's history, which is interesting. At first, I saw a lot of, MAGA-aligned commentators complaining when it was reported. Again, he hasn't been picked for Secretary of State, but it's a speculation that he's being considered, complaining about it, criticizing him, and looking at this research dossier that was pulling together his political liabilities in the event that he was chosen for vice president. It comes out pretty clear why Trump would have not picked him for that, and it makes sense that the MAGA types are complaining about it, because not only has Rubio very publicly criticized Trump in the past, but it's just not a good ideological fit in the sense that, as the dossier itself points out, he's very ideologically flexible and has changed positions, had held contradictory positions in a way that just doesn't fit with the kind of populist right-wing character of the Trump administration. So after reading it, if anything, I came away understanding why Trump's base would have been frustrated with him as a choice.
Right, and there is definitely frustration being voiced with some of the picks. I'd set my expectations pretty low and just want to be pleasantly surprised when people who reflect my kind of libertarian, non-interventionist ideology make their way into the government. I think right now, I talked about this a little bit in my monologue today, which people should watch. There's a kind of a behind-the-scenes ideological feud going on that Trump himself is, I think we can admit, basically indifferent to, and doesn't choose people really for ideological reasons, but chooses them for more personality-based or because they're appealing to him as media spokespeople on his behalf. But it is kind of amazing what Rubio, to my mind, has pulled off in terms of still being someone Trump would call on and choose for a position, given how much enmity there was between the two men. Maybe it's we've moved past it enough because he clearly still holds some kind of grudge against Nikki Haley, said she's not going to be part of this administration. But here's someone who has the exact same ideological views in terms of foreign policy, at least in terms of what he's going to do in the role he was chosen for, exactly identical to Nikki Haley, no?
Yeah, supported the Iraq War, was supportive of military intervention in Syria. When Trump in 2016 criticized former President Bush for, as he put it, not keeping us safe on 9/11 and basically, leading to the entire war on terror, something that, I was sympathetic to, and I think millions of Americans were grateful that somebody was willing to get up and say what was obvious, but which nobody in the political elite wanted to say. Rubio took the opposite position and criticized Trump bitterly for criticizing dear President Bush for 9/11. Again, supported the Iraq War, which was a huge differentiator for Trump to be able to get up there and say, hey, I don't support this, at the time that the rest of the party was still in denial about what a political catastrophe that was. I think there's real ideological incongruity here between him and Rubio. So I would encourage people to just look through the document. It's really interesting. It's the summary. It's a pretty well done and professional summary of just his various policy positions, and it does not fit. I mean, even on Russia, very hawkish on it, frequently criticized Trump for not being hawkish enough on it. So I don't understand why he's being considered for Secretary of State, if indeed that's what ends up happening.
Ken, on the topic of the dossier and what is in it, I mean, I agree that many of these policy areas where there's an apparent discordance or divergence are interesting, and it's certainly worth looking at Marco Rubio's record and what he believes. But as far as I can tell, most of the things in the dossier are part of the public record, right? It's not like there's necessarily Marco Rubio secrets that are coming to light here. It's more an exposing of what the Trump, I guess, campaign at the time thinks about Rubio, correct?
That's exactly right. All this is publicly verifiable. And to me, that's why it was such an easy call to publish it. I mean, this isn't the, Steele dossier with all these extraordinary claims that you can't really verify. All of it is verifiable.
Right, and that was what was so amazing about the decision, not to publish it at all, to just buy into the idea that it was like endorsing the hack or some foreign scheme. And the mainstream media has increasingly moved in this direction of just saying, just reproducing true information is, feeding into the whole disinformation complex. Even if it's true, if it's something a foreign power wants or has some interest in, which makes no sense, right?
Yeah, the whole debate is so simplistic. It's not, do you want foreign influence or do you not? There's a third option, which is how do you responsibly frame this information, as you guys did at the top of the segment, making it clear that this was hacked by a foreign power, as I did at the top of the article and in my previous article. I think there's a way to responsibly do this that doesn't require throwing the baby out with the bathwater and just saying, no, the public doesn't get to know what's in here.
I think the last time we spoke with you, Ken, you had recently had a visit from the FBI about some of this activity. Any more knocks on the door of late, or has that been the extent of their contact with you?
That's been the extent so far. We'll see if I get one from this. But subsequent to that story, Reuters reported that they also received a notification from the FBI. And my own sources at various news outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post indicate that they also received notifications from the FBI. None of these outlets have disclosed that to the public, save for, God bless them, Reuters for reporting that story. And interestingly, in Reuters' own story, they asked their own company for comment, and they said, we can't comment on discussions with federal law enforcement. So there's a conspiracy of silence on the part of the entire news media, it would seem, that's received similar pressure from the FBI and incidentally decided not to publish these things. And I wish that would get some attention.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Are we living in a parallel universe, or have voters moved to support both Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and President-elect Donald Trump?
The New York Congresswoman, who is known for being a member of the progressive leftist squad, was surprised to learn that many in her district swung toward Trump this election, while also at the same time supporting her.
AOC took to Instagram last week to ask her supporters about their decision. In since-expired Instagram stories, a lot of voters cited their decision as based upon what they saw as Democrats abandoning the working class. There was also a lot of dissatisfaction with establishment politicians. So, is this the beginning of a 2028 Trump AOC ticket? What do you think, Robby?
I doubt that very much. And look, I'm very critical of AOC in terms of her policies, in terms of her messaging, in terms of just about everything she does. I will say I appreciated that this seemed like a sincere effort on her part to understand where the people in her district are at. She basically asked a question on Instagram. She does make good use of social media. I think that's very fair to say. And then she shared some of the responses she got from people saying how it could be that they supported Donald Trump but also support her. And the answers were interesting, and I think she also found them interesting. You know, it's not actually that surprising. There is a whole lot of people out there who liked Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who want the establishment taken on, who want working class politics, don't think the Democratic Party is going to deliver on that. Maybe they don't even think Donald Trump is going to deliver on that either, but they're so dissatisfied with the Democratic Party they want to send a message, but they think AOC talks a lot about these issues, is better on them. So I can absolutely see why some people, and then of course there's the Israel issue. If you're a progressive leftist person who thinks Gaza is a genocide and want to send a message to the Democratic Party that you cannot support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, given what they have facilitated, then that's how you end up voting for AOC and leaving the top blank, or even voting for Donald Trump. As some Muslim people in Michigan, he got endorsed by the mayor of Hamtramck, and he got Jill Stein also got a lot of the vote in Dearborn, but so did Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, on the Gaza question, AOC came out in for a lot of criticism from the left for not being strident enough, as they saw it, in opposing the Biden-Harris administration's policies. But look, I basically agree with the case you just laid out, except I would be more prone to defend AOC in general terms. But look, I think that what she was doing there, firstly, was sincere. And I think there is obviously a substantial body of opinion in this country that is extremely dissatisfied with the status quo. Dissatisfied for good reason in a lot of ways. And obviously, if that is your overall position, you are going to be drawn to candidates who are proposing fairly fundamental change to that status quo. Now, the policy prescriptions that AOC and Donald Trump would have in that respect are vastly different. But the overall sentiment that the country needs not merely to be sort of tweaked around the edges, but sort of grinded into a very different direction, I think does supply some common ground, as it did in 2016 when there was this phenomenon that you're talking about, Bernie Sanders primary voters becoming Donald Trump general election voters.
Do you think AOC has moderated since first coming to Congress, or has chosen a different communication strategy? Because this was someone who came up through democratic socialist policies. I mean, that's a phrase we don't even hear that much anymore. I think they've been so utterly defeated in terms of the attention they get and their organizing and the mood of the country. But she was someone who was a radical, who would really, she beat out a high-ranking member of the Democratic House caucus, and I think since then has kind of slotted herself into the establishment to at least some degree. She doesn't seem to have that same level of combativeness with, for instance, Nancy Pelosi that she had at the beginning, where Nancy Pelosi said, you know, AOC represents not a real sentiment in the country, and fighting with the squad. I don't know, has the squad just become normalized into regular Democratic politics? What's your perspective?
So the way I see that is, I think AOC herself has become a bit less antagonistic to the Democratic establishment. And it was very notable to me this past year, she was one of the most defensive people of President Biden when he was in that whole crisis that ultimately led to him withdrawing from the race. And then she did endorse in a pretty wholehearted way Kamala Harris and went to campaign for her. I found the defensiveness of Biden very peculiar coming from AOC's position, because if you think about the squad, or indeed progressive politics, democratic socialists in general, they're all about this idea that no, you don't settle, you stand up for your ideals, you press forward, you don't let these sort of weak incrementalists kind of water things down. And to go from that position to a sort of like, well, Biden's kind of the best we can do, seemed a very strange position for her to get into.
I've actually already forgotten how defensive of Biden the left and the squad people were at that time. You're right that it was odd. I attributed it to two things. One being that, you know, while I disagree with leftist people, there is a commitment to even small d democratic procedures, which I think maybe they felt like swapping him out at that point was going to be violating those that norm, that ethos. And also that I think they expected the Kamala Harris foreign policy or Israel policy to be just as brutal and then some. This was, I think, their prediction, and they probably would have been correct, but then they felt no choice but to endorse her when the swap was made.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The only person that I can think of in the squad who stood out against that was Rashida Tlaib, who I don't believe ever did endorse Harris, although she appeared in campaign events, but then, if I'm recalling correctly, endorsed down ballot people. I think it is going to be interesting to see whether, if I correctly perceive AOC to be becoming less antagonistic, I'm curious what her ambitions are, because even this thing that we're talking about the Trump voters is, I mean, I think it's an honourable thing to do, and I think that she explained on Instagram that she was not trying to ask people, for example, what news sources they look to as a way to belittle them or to deride them. And so it's curious if she is trying to present herself as someone who can channel that anger in the country, perhaps either to the Senate, which would be the automatic next step up, or I don't rule out the possibility of an AOC presidential run at all. I think she'd struggle to get elected nationwide, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible. She is, honestly, she's like one of the only names on the Democratic side who gets, who's talked about in that national presidential context, who is of the left. I find interesting, for as much as there has been a pivot to the left has gotten more positive media attention than it was used to in the last couple of years. You know, the names being discussed for 2028 are Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Pete Buttigieg, maybe Gavin Newsom to some degree, although I've never really understood the appeal. He is very liberal in a way that makes liberals annoyed, and
right. And a very, very stereotypical rich guy from California.
Right, but for the most part, you're talking about people who are trying to moderate the image of the Democratic Party, who I think will do even more of that over the next 4 years. And then you have AOC, who is, you know, we're talking about some changes in how she presents herself, but is still certainly a figure of, at least of the progressive movement, if she's not hard Democratic socialist left, way more progressive than those other names.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously, Bernie Sanders is the age he is. Elizabeth Warren is not Sanders' age, but of a different generation to AOC. You have AOC there, 35, charismatic. Yes, lots of people hate her, but lots of people love her. We've seen, I guess, with Trump, most notably, how that can actually work in a political sense. The fact that lots of people dislike you is not necessarily a massive hindrance, as long as an equal or slightly greater number of people love you. And, you know, you mentioned social media. She's a very good fit for a new kind of politics. She obviously has an enormous social media following. So, you know, as I say, I think, you know, do I see her easily, carrying Pennsylvania? I have a little bit of difficulty with that, but I think she would be a credible candidate if she ran.
Well, we will find out. Stay tuned for a lot more coming up on Rising. We are going to be discussing a meeting taking place between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's happening right now. Stay tuned. I guess someone is a little past their prime. Don Lemon will be leaving Twitter X. He announced in a message on that platform. Let's watch it right now.
Hi, everyone. I have loved connecting with all of you on Twitter and then on X for all of these years. But it's time for me to leave the platform. I once believed that it was a place for honest debate and discussion, transparency and free speech. But I now feel it does not serve that purpose. In addition, starting this Friday, November 15th, X is implementing new terms of service, which among other things states that, quote, all disputes be brought exclusively in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas or state courts located in Tarrant County, Texas, end quote. The full terms of service can be found on my written statement or on the X website. Now, as the Washington Post recently reported on X's decision to change the terms, this, quote, ensures that such lawsuits will be heard in courthouses that are a hub for conservatives, which experts say could make it easier for X to shield itself from litigation and punish critics. I think that speaks for itself.
Oh, I'm so sorry to see him go. So sad. But of course, we can still watch him on Bluesky, which did I make a Bluesky account? I've never posted there. I can't keep it. I can't keep it straight from Threads or all the other pretend social media competitor sites that are just liberal for you, not taking off at all. These are like, I don't know, trauma circles for liberals who've abandoned X.
So I think there's two questions here, apart from your sympathy for all these media figures for whom your heart is clearly bleeding today. Right?
Breaking. Again, where is my tissue box?
You just got a lot of people who you really feel for who are struggling badly today.
It's hard.
Look, Don Lemon's message, I think, was fairly self-important, and I don't necessarily think that people need to make a minute-long or however long that was video explaining their reasons for these things. I do think there's a separate issue about Twitter. You and I have spoken before about Elon Musk, in a sense, riding two horses. On one hand as the proprietor of X, on the other hand of someone who spent, I think, well over $100 million on President-elect Trump's election. So I think that's an issue. I think that there has been, I mean, there's just been an automatic self-fulfilling thing about X in the Musk era, where he opened up the verification to people who were prepared to pay the fee. Obviously, you're more prepared to pay that fee if you love Elon Musk. If you love Elon Musk, there tends to be other worldviews that are associated with that or concomitant with that. And so the usage of X becomes very Elon-loving, and all the other views that go along with that, a sort of right-leaning, would you call it even libertarianism? I don't know if he's really libertarian.
Elon exercises influence in a more libertarian direction than some of the other people in his orbit, I would say. And Vivek Ramaswamy similarly has been talking about libertarian nationalism versus the national conservatism. That's kind of the intellectual battle happening right now. I mean, I agree with you, obviously, that Elon has made X a more, basically just a conservative media platform and has chased some of the liberals away. What I find interesting is that they've not really, I mean, I know a lot of people moving to Bluesky, but it's nothing of significance right now. The liberals have not formed their own other thing. Yeah, they still could, but right now just the kind of power, I would argue often dark and badly used power that Twitter particularly had several years ago before Elon to engage in or to whip up mob-like activity and cancel culture has dissipated in a way that's helpful for our society. You used to be able to, I mean, this would happen. It would get old tweets from someone, would get dragged up, then there would be this tremendous pile-on by mostly progressive people, and then the media would write about and say, oh, tweets resurfaced the other day. Well, you're engaging in the process of actively resurfacing them. They don't dig themselves out of the sand. It's done by people, and it's covered by you. And that has become less possible to do in a way that is good, I think.
I think that is fair. I think that I always had ambivalence about what was then Twitter and is now X because, you know, parts of it I liked, parts of it I disliked. I do think that at one point in the pre-Elon moment, it was more neutral isn't quite the right word, but open to people to write what they wished, and there were broader range of debates. And I think, like a lot of more traditional media, it's becoming increasingly sort of cleaved off into ideological directions. Now, it may not surprise you to note that I already had a Bluesky account, which I went back to this past week to see if it was picking up more traction. I do see more people on there. It reportedly picked up around 1 million new users since the election. One thing that I'm curious about is whether, I mean, it's obviously a lot smaller than X, and I would like it to be a more, general forum. My worry is that it becomes a sort of a liberal truth social, which is pointless for my purposes as well, because then you just have people talking to themselves and congratulating each other on how right they are about everything, and I don't find that very interesting.
And then you have the problem, Numiki and I were having this argument the other day where she's saying, well, the algorithm on X is pushing just conservative content on people and they don't want it. I was like, I don't know exactly what's going on, but what I suspect is that with the exodus of liberal-minded people, the ideological orientation of the average user of the site has moved to the right, and it is not, I don't think it's so much the case that the algorithm is pumping content at people that they don't want to see. That would be an unusual feature for a social media site that wants to be profitable. More likely, it is pumping exactly the kind of content that the now existing user base wants to see, and that just is moving in a rightward direction.
Yeah, which, one of the question marks over Elon Musk's ownership of X is these stories that come out frequently about how it has fallen significantly in value because there has been an exodus of more liberal users, but also because I think it has become identified with the right in a way that maybe some advertisers love, but others don't at all, because you are now perceived to be lining up with Elon Musk's political views, and to a certain degree.
To a degree, although I think some of the advertisers declining to work with X was not, I mean, it was freely arrived at by them, but was motivated by some, in my view, not entirely honest descriptions of how much Nazi or hateful content there's on the site that's counted by like Media Matters type organizations that are very ideologically driven and routinely, in my view, overinflate the amount of hate. The way they're quantifying it is to make it sound like this problem is always getting worse and always out of control, and that is what spooked advertisers rather than the advertisers of their own volition independently saying, oh, we don't want our stuff next to this. Some of the documents those third-party organizations have produced to show, look at your ad next to some Nazi was very dishonest when it was looked at closely, and I would warn advertisers to be discerning of that kind of thing. Before we wrap, we should comment on what Don Lemon actually said in that video about the court venue changing, which I know nothing about, but like, what are you going to be suing X over? The point of the internet statute, which I defend all the time, Section 230, is that, right, the platform cannot be sued for your content. You can be sued. It's your words. The platform can't. That's true of Facebook. That's true of the comment section on any website online. That's just how it works. If you could sue the website, that would end the internet as we know it. They would not allow people to just spout off, and I like people spouting off, so we should not change that law.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other argument about that particular section of the law. I don't know exactly what Don Lemon's referring to there. I did find it an odd amalgam of arguments that on one hand he was like, come see my YouTube show, and then into the middle of it was welded this piece about the Texas courts. Was he suggesting he would sue Twitter, he would be sued? I mean, I don't know what that was about.
Well, keep trying, Don Lemon. I'm sure there's a platform out there where you can succeed one day. Keep the faith. More Rising right after this. View co-host Whoopi Goldberg wants you to believe she is a working-class American hustling for her paycheck like the rest of the country.
Goldberg revealed on the show Tuesday that if she had the money, she would quit The View, adding that she is part of the working class and she's trying to feed her family. Let's take a listen.
I appreciate that people are having a hard time. Me too.
Yeah.
I work for a living. If I had all the money in the world, I would not be here. Okay? So I'm a working person.
Whoopi's whopping net worth clocks in at $60 million, with her annual salary for co-hosting the show sitting at about $5 or $6 million in 2016 alone. So is Whoopi moonlighting as a working class person? The latest example of media elites trying to relate to middle class America. And she's entitled to her salary. She worked her way up. I think she does come from very humble origins. I've been impressed with a lot of the movies and acting and singing she's done. I even, frankly, occasionally, although this happens less and less, appreciate her commentary on The View. I think she's one of the more independent thinkers of those ladies, and every now and then she says something I agree with or observes something I think is interesting. That seems to happen less and less as time goes on. But she's entitled to her paycheck, which she earns, and there's no problem with it. But she can't portray herself, I'm sorry, as a struggling working class American. Come on, there's no, right?
Look, here's the thing. Anytime we discuss anyone, we all have personal biases at play. I like her. I mean, obviously I don't know her. I kind of like Whoopi Goldberg. I find her entertaining.
Sister Act, great.
I find her incisive. I like her acting work, her movies. And so I'm always a bit reluctant to put the boot in. And so she does, as you say, she did grow up in modest surroundings. It's plainly not an accurate thing to say by any reasonable yardstick that someone on that kind of money needs to keep working in order to keep themselves, off the breadline. I'm not sure really what argument she was trying to make. I mean, is it a hardship for her to go on The View every day at that salary? That seems unlikely. I guess she was trying to display empathy for working people. I will stretch here, Robby, and say I do think that people who grow up in modest backgrounds tend to hold on to that mindset, and there is always, in the back of your mind, a worry about, material well-being and financial security and all of that. But it's difficult for me to argue that Whoopi Goldberg is really struggling to make ends meet.
Saying Marie Antoinette is a struggling working class French woman. Yeah. The dirty secret of media is that so many people in it who do punditry, commentary on various cable news channels, not only do they come from wealth, I think that's even a more minor thing. The bigger thing is nepotism, is that they are sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters and cousins, and they have of congressmen, of politically connected people, so people who edit and report and work at, not even on television, but behind the scenes in magazines and newspapers, have been in this town forever or in New York forever because they have political connections. There's so much nepotism going on in the media. It is rarer and rarer for someone to rise through the ranks who didn't get introduced to the network or the institution by a famous relative.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think that is one of the increasing problems with media, generally speaking. It has become, even over the length of time I've been working in the media, it has become more of an affluent person's game, at least in terms of getting into it at the start, where people from more modest backgrounds really struggle with either unpaid or very low-paid internships. That's the way to get in, is either nepotism or those internships. That is difficult for people who are coming from a more working class background. And I think this actually gets to a wider point, which is the way we talk about diversity, which is often just used as code for racial diversity and sometimes diversity of sexual identity. But in fact, people from working class backgrounds of any ethnicity are way underrepresented in the media. People from rural backgrounds are way underrepresented in the media, whether that is white or black or any other ethnicity. And so that issue, I think, is one that really deserves to be talked about more.
I could not agree more with you. That's an observation that really struck me when I was reading Batya Ungar-Sargon's book. Batya used to host occasionally on Rising as well, and she pointed out exactly what you're saying, that journalism used to be a working class profession. It was not a profession for the moneyed elite necessarily at all over the course of the 20th century. It became so in part because having a college degree or even an advanced degree has become more and more of a prerequisite for being in the field. Even though it's I always say this: journalism is a craft. It's not, in my view, really an academic discipline. I mean, you can always study more and become better at whatever, but really the tools to practice it beyond basic reading and writing skills that should be mastered by everyone beyond like the 7th grade. Unfortunately, it is not in American schools, but should be pretty well knocked out in primary education. Beside that, the kinds of things you need to learn to do it are best learned on the job in an internship, apprenticeship, or working. If you do go to school, this was my background. I didn't study journalism, but I worked for the college newspaper at the University of Michigan. That's where I learned everything about reporting and doing interviews and crafting editorials and how to hold the recorder when you're talking to someone and going to events, doing coverage of events. All that kind of stuff is really just not best learned in the classroom. It's just best learned on-the-job training. So that should really be the model for journalism.
No, I agree 100% with that, and I have no journalism qualification now. Well, that's a commendation or not, I don't know. I have an undergraduate degree, but it's in English literature. But the point,
me as well.
Well, there you go. You see, common ground at last. But no, I think I remember first coming to the US and looking into journalism masters. I think it was at Columbia, and the cost. And I was by this stage in my late 20s and had begun my career in Ireland and the UK. The cost was exorbitant. There's no way I could have afforded it at that stage, and it was just like ridiculous.
I remember seeing there's a specific one that's for journalism with a special focus in financial literacy, and it's so expensive. If you enroll in this, it proves you are unfit to practice this job. Do not do this. I warn everyone. It is not. You will not make enough. You can make good money in journalism if you get to the top. We're doing just fine. We're not Whoopi Goldberg out here complaining that we got to get Robby a bigger paycheck or something. But do not go massively into debt. Honestly, I believe this for any field. Be very careful going into debt to get a degree. There's probably some college, some educational thing you can do that is way cheaper where you don't have to go into massive debt. I mean, if it's your parents' money and they don't care, then fine, go ahead, have fun, live your best life. But if you're going to be expected to pay this back, you ought to be really careful about what you do.
Digging yourself into far too deep a hole pointlessly.
It's terrifying. Do not do it. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks for watching. We had a spicy show, a lot of criticism of Whoopi Goldberg, Don Lemon, and company. Please subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. And we will be back tomorrow. See you then.